Welcome to another Deck Tech brought to you by MTG Deck Techs. This is Sean, and let me open by promising we aren't MTG Nexus of Fate, but our mission is to bring you the most relevant content possible. So today we're going to look at what is likely the next evolution of Nexus of Fate lists in the form of blue-red Nexus of Fate. We look again at Nexus of Fate, a powerful effect printed on a more powerful card type than previously. This card has a few unique interactions that make it an unbelievable extra turn. First, turn 2, you play a search for Azcanta and need lands. When you see a Nexus Fate on top of your deck, you can put it in the graveyard and not lose the card for good as it shuffles away. Secondly, if you decide you're going to want to cast this card on your turn, and you don't have other things you want to do before casting it, you want to cast it at your upkeep before you draw your card to increase the probability that you redraw a Nexus of Fate by putting another one in your deck to draw. While there are a few other implications, we will mention the big one is how it warps the control matchup. Your opponent has 3 lands and an untapped Azcanta, the Sunken Ruin. When they go to activate that card at your end step, if you have the 7 available mana, you can cast Nexus of Fate in response. This will mean that even though they've activated their Azcanta, they'll now be tapped out and you get to begin taking your extra turn and potentially go infinite. This also impacts whenever they try to cast Glimmer of Genius or Torrential Gearhulk on your end step. If they don't leave the extra mana open to be able to counter your Nexus of Fates, you end up being able to just go infinite in response to anything they try to do on your end step. The deck can cheat out Nexus and abuse it off of Primal Wellspring. Early, the spring enables accelerated interactions to help you keep alive against more aggressive decks, or to play your draw spells a lot cheaper against the control matchups, as a 3 mana Glimmer is a lot more efficient than the 4 mana Glimmer. When you flip the spell, it will also lead to your most broken games, as you quickly stack 3, 4, or 5 plus turns into your queue by using the doubling effect on the other side of the Primal Amulet. When Primal Wellspring is tapped for a mana and used it to cast a spell, you get to copy that spell. So it also will double your removal spells and your win condition that we'll see later. Secondly, we have the Matron of Fire in the form of bulk mythic from Dominaria, for now at least, Jaya Ballard. Against control, she allows you to easily cycle away dead cards, as you will frequently have 2 to 3 cards such as Harness Lightning and Braids and Sweltering Suns in your hand. So you get to just discard up to 3 and draw 3 cards. So a lot of times you will, especially the first time you activate her, get to cycle 3 cards away. She generates 3 mana to help you accelerate your Nexus, making your Nexus a 4 mana play. But she also allows you to play removal spells against aggressive decks, or turn 5 play this and another spell such as Sweltering Zones for a deck that goes wide. The Emblem is a way for you to win that long game against control decks, or for you to use your removal spells early and later on use them to finish the game. The blue-red Nexus deck is, in my opinion, the superior shell over Fog because it doesn't have to run as many narrow or bad cards as the Bant Fog list has to do. Instead, it gets to replace them with stronger interactions, stronger removal, and stronger card draw that have less dead attributes to control matchups, which is now a growing deck. Azcanta plays the same role in Bant as fixing your draw steps, but once it's flipped, it actually acts as a ramp spell because now you have an extra land that you paid 2 mana for, and a way to dig towards your next Nexus of Fate. So Azcanta the Sunken Ruin fills multiple roles you need at various points of the game. The deck runs the full 4 Glimmer of Genius, which a lot of the Bant lists don't get to run, or if they are running it, their consistency against aggressive lists goes down. This card allows you to hunt and find your Glimmers and your interactions as necessary to make the game very quick, especially as your deck thins out. It isn't uncommon to see 4 cards off the Glimmer of Genius, because you know what you're looking for at any given moment. So if that card isn't in the top 2, you immediately scry them away. So a lot of times you will see 3 to 4 cards off the Glimmer of Genius. Our last form of filtering and flex slot is Supreme Will. The deck runs 3 Supreme Wills, and this will act as a mana leak against decks that are pressuring us or the control decks to force through a Nexus. Or at other points of the game, whenever we have a Primal Amulet in play, it can be a 2 mana, look at the top 4 cards of your deck and put whatever you need in your hand. And it gives you just that extra way to find more Nexus of Fates or find interaction if your opponents are really pressuring your game. The deck abandons Fog for true interaction, meaning cards such as Insult to Injury are now no longer as important in this matchup because you're replacing them for true removal spells as opposed to fogging. So instead of your opponents having Insult to Injury to force their way through, now they have this awkward card that really isn't as efficient against you. With Harness Lightning, you get a chance to generate a decent amount of energy because you have Aether Hubs and Glimmer of Geniuses, and you have your Harness Lightnings. The only time your Harness Lightnings truly get stretched on their plays are against the mono green decks or the really slow red-black decks. The mono green decks can be a tough matchup where you're going to need your sideboard. The slower red-black decks don't have as fast of a clock, so those you're normally not as worried about between these spells and your eventual interactions, or your Nexus of Fate cycles. The green deck, you will want to see an Aether Hub and a Harness Lightning in your opening hand so you can kill turn 2 Steel Leaf Champions. The deck currently has a 1-of a Braid, and it could potentially need more of that depending on how much God Pharaoh's Gift or vehicle style decks are in the format. But the Abrade does a really decent job of killing certain creatures in certain red-black matchups, green-black matchups. It's just not as great against the mono-green deck, as a lot of those creatures have 4 toughness. It has an additional flexibility against the mono-blue Storm list and God Pharaoh's Gift, as you can blow up the primary cards to win, because especially with the mono-blue Storm list, a lot of their artifacts don't matter except for 1 or 2. Lastly, we have 2 Fight with Fires, which act as removal spells early, or we can rebuy them off a Jaya emblem or cycling them in with Commit to Memory, but these are typically how we're going to win the game. By kicking the spell and using a flipped Primal Amulet, using the Primal Wellspring, we can double the spell and immediately just deal 20 damage to our opponent for 9 mana. The effect will also work out of the graveyard if you use your Primal Amulet, or if you have enough turns stacked up, you can just use no Amulet, deal 10 to them, take an extra turn, using Jaya's Emblem, flash it back, dealing another 10. And very few decks are really gaining life, so this additional 20 damage is enough to win you the game. If you end up coming short, between all the Fight with Fires, the Jaya's Emblems, and the Commit to Memories, you can typically set up a situation to cycle through your deck enough times to cast Fight with Fire kicked multiple times. Our last removal spell is mostly for the white-black Knight variants, the red aggressive matches, and some green-black matches when they haven't gone off with their counters. These are going to be your Sweltering Suns. Sweltering Suns is not great against a lot of decks, but it does have the upside of being able to be cycled. The decks you typically don't want it against, you normally will have time to cycle it, with the exception of the mono-green matchup. This is where we're going to have some sideboard cards just for the mono-green matchup. We also have the card Syncopate. Syncopate has a few effects that make it really important in this list. It synergizes really well with Primal Amulet, because if you have 1 mana open, it's a 4 spike. But it also is really important against the Nexus of Fate Mirror, because it exiles the spell if the counter resolves. So if they tap out for 7 to cast a Nexus of Fate, and they don't have the mana to pay for it or counter back and use Syncopate, then you can actually exile one of their Nexus of Fates. Having 4 Nexus of Fates in your list, and them only having 3, is a fairly large advantage for you. Our final card is a Commit to Memory. Sometimes this will get flexed for some Chandra cards. It just depends on how the list is built. Commit provides flexibility as far as bouncing a permanent that's in play that you resolved and didn't have a way to interact with, such as Planeswalkers. But it also acts as a good way to tempo your opponent out, and then once you start getting your infinite turns, using memory to refill your hand. You typically don't want to cast memory unless you're starting to run low on options, because you want to keep a lot of the removal spells and other less ideal cards in your graveyard, so your deck is as thin as possible, so the 4 Nexus of Fates get drawn as often as you can. But it does give you that additional reach if necessary, and it can act as a good reset versus decks such as God Pharaoh's Gift. The land is fairly simple. We want to make sure that our mana is coming in untapped and efficient as often as possible. So it runs the 4 Spirebluff Canals and 4 Sulfur Falls, with a lot of basics to make the falls come into play untapped, and 4 hubs. The hubs are really important for our mono-green matchups, so our Harness Lightnings can kill Steel Leaf champions, but they also provide early game fixing if necessary. The other rest of the lands, we have Field of Ruin for the mirror matches, so we can blow up their flipped Searcher as Cantus. And then we have 6 mountains and 6 islands. Depending on if you adjust your deck and put in Chandras or other red spells, you might need to adjust this balance, but for the most part, this has worked fairly well. You are moving away from utility lands such as Memorial to Genius, because you just want to make sure that whenever you have interaction in hand, your mana is untapped and you're able to cast that interaction. Being able to interact with your board, your long game is powerful enough that you don't need special lands to accomplish things. Our sideboard has a few targets of what we're trying to face. We have Magma Spray, which is really efficient against mono red, Scrap Heap Scrounger decks such as red black, or other aggro decks such as white black knights. And we bring in these 2 Hour of Devastations for any mid-range or green matchup where we feel like they're going to have a large number of creatures that we can't contend with, such as when our Sweltering Suns is less ideal. We're no longer cycling the Sweltering Suns, so we're bringing some of those out for the Hour of Devastations we want to make sure we stick our board wipes on. The remainder of the sideboard is just to pressure the growing control decks. We get 4 Negates, 4 Whirler Virtuosos, and 3 Trencher Gear Hulks. The deck is fairly consistent versus the standard control shells, because you have a lot of inevitability, and your long game is a little bit more dominating than most of their long games. Teferi isn't as terrifying against you, because you can take multiple turns in a row, preventing him from reaching his emblem. The Negates help making sure that the Teferi isn't resolving on turn 5, or later on pushing your own Nexus through. The Whirler Virtuosos and the Gear Hulks are great swaps for your removal spells, which are now dead, because your control opponents are going to board out a lot of their interaction and leave you free to just pressure their life total with these early creatures. They also act as other fight with fires, where if you stick a Torrential Gearhulk and you string together a couple free turns, your Torrential Gearhulk can really quickly just end the game. To pressure your control opponents, you want to make sure that you're bringing out your removal and you're bringing in these early clocks. This sideboard might need adjustment depending on how the rest of the metagame shakes out, as you might want to add cards such as Chandra, Torch of Defiance into your list because it can also have play against mono green. It really just depends on what matchups you're expecting to face and what's going to really scare you the most. The sideboard for now is mostly designed just to give you play against the big creature decks and the control decks. So if you have a lot of blue-black decks that are starting to pop up, such as in the recent GPs, you might need to look at adjusting your sideboard and deciding what cards go in. So Nexus of Fate is all the talk right now for Standard. Much of that is negative based on availability, but some of it has been the sheer power of the card. What are your takeaways from Nexus of Fate so far? Do you think the card is overhyped based on the availability, or is it oppressively inevitable? Do you think the card is actually overrated and the decks are able to press it out of the format since it didn't have great results in Brussels or Orlando? Let us know below. I would definitely recommend trying out the Blue-Red Jaya list for a spin before you consider giving up on Nexus of Fate as a shell, especially if you find that Fog doesn't really have that punch that you want. The deck reminds me a lot in playstyle of the Sphinx's Revelation decks of old, so definitely give it a chance. As always, make sure to give us a like or a follow on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, and Facebook. You can let us know what decks you want to see streamed, deck techs about, or you can read our articles we're writing about various formats. You can visit us at mtgdecktechs.com or on any of these social media platforms.